Let's dive right into this fascinating explainer. We're looking at Arrigo Serveto's analysis of how economic realities actually drive human thought and state building. We usually look back at history and see this lineup of great minds who changed the world with their brilliant ideas. But today, we're flipping that entire script upside down. We're going to break down some incredibly complex historical dynamics and turn them into clear, actionable takeaways. So, do brilliant ideas shape history, or does history shape brilliant ideas? What's really interesting here is that this question challenges the very foundation of how we normally view the genius of philosophers and scientists. Serveto's work suggests that, well, ideas just don't fall from the sky. They aren't born in a vacuum. Instead, they're the direct, almost mechanical byproducts of shifting economic needs and class struggles. It's a completely different lens for viewing human progress, and the evidence we'll look at today makes a highly compelling case. To answer that opening question, we're going to explore Serveto's interconnected engine across four distinct phases. First, theory and political action. Second, the birth of the modern state. Third, science driven by production. And finally, ideology as political shell. Okay, moving right into part one, theory and political action, or grasping the practical sense. To really get this framework, we actually start in the 20th century. According to Serveto's reading of this quote from Nikolai Bukharin, revolutionary leaders like Lenin weren't just abstract thinkers sitting around in a library somewhere. They wielded theory as a highly practical tool. They used it to literally solve the unique crises of their specific imperialist epoch. Theory wasn't just something to be memorized, right? It was a mechanism to understand the real movement of society. Basically, if a theory didn't have a practical application to the changing balance of forces, it was tossed out as mere fetishism. And this dynamic is the absolute core of the Marxist method, as Serveto defines it. This method seeks to prove that every political or philosophical formula is, at its root, an answer to a shifting economic reality. When the economy changes, the ideas of the era literally must change to match it. It's an analytical tool for looking past what people are saying so we can see the actual structural forces making them say it. So, the crucial takeaway here is that a true vision of any era requires a complete synthesis of theoretical abstraction and practical material arithmetic. You've got to be able to see the broad, sweeping historical shifts, called out the algebra, and simultaneously calculate the minute, on-the-grounds hackable realities, the arithmetic. With that lens locked in, let's step back in time. Section 2. The birth of the modern state in the 16th century crucible. Let's see how this actually builds in reality. In the 16th century, the world market was suddenly opening up. The Americas had been discovered, and entirely new ways of generating wealth were emerging. This created a massive divergence. Serveto contrasts the fragmented feudalism of Italy and Germany against the rapidly centralizing military and tax powers of France and England. Over in Italy and Germany, decentralized wealth and local nobility kept power totally fragmented. But in France and England, we see the rise of the absolutist state, unified national armies, and centralized taxation. So why did they diverge so drastically? Well, it all comes down to economic flow and military necessity. The mechanical solution to the era's problems went exactly like this. As market trade expanded, states had to centralize taxation just to protect those new trade routes. Those centralized taxes then bought the military power, specifically national citizen armies rather than those unreliable mercenary bands, necessary to enforce borders and crush local feudal lords. That exact combination is what birthed the modern absolutist state. Economic expansion literally forced political centralization. Looking through this lens, Machiavelli's famous theories weren't just born in a vacuum. They were a desperate theoretical response to Italy's glaring lack of unified military and fiscal power. Machiavelli wasn't just some clever guy jotting down abstract thoughts on power. He was observing the fatal economic and military fragmentation of Italy and writing a practical manual, a theory, on how to synthesize a centralized state that could actually survive the new European reality. Let's jump to Section 3. Science driven by production, or the practical engine of discovery. This interconnected engine didn't just drive politics, it completely revolutionized human knowledge. As Friedrich Engels pointed out in this powerful quote, the explosion of the scientific revolution during the Renaissance was directly catalyzed by the material needs of emerging capitalism. It wasn't some miracle of pure thought, it was a miracle of production. The rapidly expanding economies of Europe were hitting major technical roadblocks, and science was essentially drafted to clear the way. The direct cause and effect here is just staggering. The bloody, practical demands of war, trade, and extraction literally forced the creation of modern physics and astronomy. Think about it. Kings didn't fund scientists because they loved stargazing. They funded them because global navigation required precise astronomical data to calculate longitude. Artillery required deep understanding of mechanics and trajectories. Deep mining for raw materials made the study of hydrodynamics absolutely necessary, just to pump water out of the shafts. And just look at the tools that made all of this possible. The compass, the water wheel, precise wind-up clocks, the telescope. These tools were originally perfected to maximize manufacturing efficiency, coordinate labor, and ensure the safety of global shipping. But they inadvertently handed humanity the keys to understanding the cosmos. A clock, built to measure production and navigate the oceans, suddenly gave science the ability to measure uniform motion. Therefore, the brilliant discoveries of figures like Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler were fundamentally propelled by the economic necessity of their rapidly changing environment. Yes, they had absolutely incredible minds, but those minds were applied to the exact problems that early capitalism desperately needed solved. Production posed the questions, science provided the answers. Now for our final phase, Section 4, Ideology as Political Shell, focusing on 17th century England. To really unpack the climax of this historical engine, we have to use Servetto's metaphor of shell and content. This is a hugely important concept for our explainer. It means recognizing how raw economic struggles disguise themselves in ideological or religious clothing. The content is always the underlying struggle for material power and wealth, but the shell is the language, often highly moral or theological, that people use to actually fight that struggle. Take a look beneath the surface of the deeply fragmented society in 17th century England. You had a highly complex stratification of new classes fiercely battling for control of the nation's wealth during the English Civil War. You've got wealthy city financiers, a new capitalist-minded nobility known as the gentry, alongside small, independent artisans and poor wage earners. The old absolute monarchy was choking their economic development, so a massive shift in the balance of power was completely inevitable. But here is the truly fascinating part. They didn't fight this war explicitly over profit margins. While they argued passionately over theology and church structure, debating whether to be Anglican, Presbyterian, or independent Congregationalist, the actual content of their struggle was pure economic power. As the source material points out, the independents, who demanded a strict separation of church and state, actually represented the most advanced fractions of the new bourgeoisie, who simply wanted maximum economic freedom. Theology was the shell, class struggle was the content. And this brilliantly illustrates how within a single century, English philosophy rapidly evolved to parallel that shifting balance of power. In the 1620s, Francis Bacon laid down the rational, materialist method needed for an expanding, aggressive power. By 1651, right in the middle of Civil War, Thomas Hobbes systemized this into a theory demanding absolute state authority to prevent chaos. And by 1690, John Locke published works reflecting a successful class compromise, which became the bedrock of modern liberalism. In short, these legendary thinkers didn't exist in a vacuum. They were indirectly drafting the political shell for the newly triumphant capitalist economy. As the economic base of England mutated from feudalism into early capitalism, the philosophical superstructure evolved right alongside it. It provided the necessary rules, justifications, and state theories to keep the whole new system running smoothly. Which leaves us with one incredibly provocative thought to walk away with today. If economic shifts created the modern state and modern science, as today's global economy undergoes massive shifts with new technologies, changing supply chains, and rising global powers, what new political ideologies are currently being built inside the shell of today's economy? If Servetto's analysis holds true, the intense debates we're having today about politics, philosophy, and society are really just the outer shell of a massive economic engine roaring underneath. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I hope this structural way of looking at history gives you a sharp new tool for understanding the present.